Picture this. You're 6 years old. It's Tuesday morning. You're in your footy pajamas. You've got a bowl of Cocoa Puffs that is legally at least 40% sugar. Nickelodeon is on, and a kind old cartoon gnome with a little red hat looks directly at the camera, says goodbye to his pet fox, and then peacefully walks into the mountains with his wife to die. Nick Jr., ladies and gentlemen. For children ages 2 through 5, but also, on a completely different channel, the CEO of Disney was out there making a medieval fantasy epic about bouncing bears because his kids ate a gummy candy, and that candy is the reason DuckTales exists. You're welcome. And then there's the Wuzzles, Disney's other show that launched on the same exact day, at the same time, on a different network, competing against themselves in the ratings, which is a sentence that gets more baffling the longer you think about it. It lasted 13 episodes, ended tragically, and left behind a herd of mascot costumes that have since been quietly haunting Will Ferrell movies for 40 years. 3 shows, 3 wildly different flavors of 80s Sunday morning chaos. 0 of them nearly got enough credit. This is Fever Dream Nostalgia. Buckle up, because today we're going somewhere deeply beautiful, chaotically weird. The world of David the Gnome. Okay, so you know every great piece of children's entertainment starts with a wild international relay race of creative decisions made by people on 3 different continents. No? Well, David the Gnome is going to teach you. It started with a Dutch book, published in the Netherlands in 1976, a year when the Americans still were processing disco and Gerald Ford. Writer Will Ferrell and illustrator Rain Portevelt released something called The Secret Book of Gnomes. And when I say book, I want to be clear. This was not a picture book. This was a field guide, a scientific, illustrated, deeply earnest field guide to gnome society, complete with gnome anatomy diagrams, gnome house construction blueprints, gnome dietary habits, gnome mating rituals. Will Ferrell was out here writing what was essentially a biology textbook for creatures that do not exist, and it became an international bestseller because the 70s were a different time and people had different priorities. A Spanish animation company called Be Right Back Internacional, run by a guy named Claudio Byrne Boyd, who has literally been nicknamed the Spanish Walt Disney, which is a nickname so large you either earn it or you don't, saw the book and said, animated series, yes. And in 1985, David the Gnome premiered in Spain. Then Cinner, a Canadian dubbing studio, got hold of it and said, we're putting this on American children's television. And they did. But here's the part where things get genuinely impressive. For the English dub, they didn't phone it in. They didn't grab whoever was available on a Tuesday afternoon. They got Christopher Plummer to narrate. Christopher Plummer, the man who played Captain Von Trapp in The Sound of Music. The man who won an Academy Award at age 82 and became the oldest person ever to do so. They got that guy to narrate a cartoon gnome show for Nick Jr., and he was magnificent. His voice over those woodland scenes sounds like someone carved God out of good mahogany. And the voice of David himself? Tom Bosley, Mr. Howard Cunningham, Richie's dad from Happy Days, the man who played a Catholic priest on Father Dowling Mysteries despite being Jewish in real life, which is a fun detail that has nothing to do with gnomes, but I can't let it go. Tom Bosley brought a warmth and a gentleness to David that was absolutely perfect. Like if your grandfather was also a 6-inch tall forest doctor who rode a fox to work. You'd trust him completely. You'd follow him anywhere, even, apparently, into the mountains to die. What the show was actually about, a love letter to nature, wrapped in a red hat. Now, for those of you who only vaguely remember David the Gnome as the one with the fox, let me paint you a fuller picture. David was a 399-year-old gnome doctor, which, side note, if you are 399 years old and still working, we need to have a conversation about work-life balance. David, who rode his loyal fox Swift across the European countryside, healing injured animals, helping lost creatures, and repeatedly outwitting a gang of 4 trolls named Pit, Pat, Pot, and Holler. The trolls were hairy, smelly, spectacularly dumb, and had one critical weakness: sunlight turned them into stone, which is somehow both hilarious and an excellent lesson in why you should stay hydrated and get outside more. Meanwhile, David's wife Lisa stayed home, ran the household, and occasionally saved David when he inevitably got himself captured, which, for a show that was essentially called The Calm Gnome Show, happened with surprising frequency. You're a doctor, David. Maybe stop antagonizing the trolls. Just a thought. The show was quietly radical for 1998 children's television. Episodes covered pesticide, poisoning in animals, environmental destruction, habitat loss. Also, Swift the fox could apparently run from Europe to the Himalayas without breaking a sweat. This is never explained. We don't question it. Swift is not bound by the laws of cartography. Swift is simply built different. The finale. Congratulations! You're a tree now. Okay, we need to talk about The Mountains of Beyond. Episode 26, the series finale of David the Gnome. A piece of television that was aired on a children's network at children's television hours and which contains perhaps the most emotionally complex ending in the entire history of Saturday morning cartoons. I want you to picture the studio executive meeting where this was approved. So, for the finale, the main characters, the beloved husband and wife the children have watched for 7 years, they're going to calmly accept their own death, ride a deer into the mountains, say goodbye to their fox, sit down together, hold hands, and become apple trees. And whoever was in that room said, "Perfect, cleared, ship it. This is Nick Jr. content." Here's what actually happens. David and Lisa know they are 4 to 100 years old, the maximum gnome lifespan, and so they decide it is simply time. They finish their affairs, write their journals, pack their things, and say goodbye to everyone. Their old friend Casper, a gnome bachelor, asks if he can come with them because he doesn't want to die alone, which is the most quietly devastating thing ever written into a children's show, and they say yes. And then the three of them walk up into the mountains. They find a spot they like. David turns to Swift, his loyal fox, his partner, his best friend across 4 centuries, and he gently shoos him away because he doesn't want Swift to see what happens next. And Swift trots off, confused and alone. That is the specific moment where every adult watching this in 2024 absolutely loses it. The fox has to leave. Swift doesn't understand. David and Lisa hold hands. They kiss, or because they're gnomes, they rub noses, which is gnome kissing, which is somehow even more tender. And they become trees. 2 beautiful apple trees on a mountain. Their spirits rise up and wave goodbye. The camera pulls back. The forest is quiet. And then the episode ended. And a 6-year-old, somewhere in suburban Ohio, looked at the television, looked down at their Cocoa Puffs, looked back at the television, and said, "Wait." And their parents had to explain death. Because Nick Jr. just did it first. Without warning, at 9 in the morning, with apple trees. Tom Bosley's performance in that finale is genuinely beautiful. The Spanish voice actor, Jose Maria Cordero, was reportedly trying not to cry for real when David says goodbye to Swift. They felt it. And decades later, you still feel it. That's not an accident. That's what happens when you respect your audience, even when your audience is 4 years old and covered in cereal milk. David the Gnome taught a generation of kids something that Saturday morning television was absolutely not required to teach. That endings don't have to be violent or chaotic or ugly. Sometimes endings are just a hill you like, and the person you love, and then your trees. That's it. That's enough. Now, let's go from the show that ended peacefully to the show that started everything. And I mean literally everything. Because one man watched his kid eat candy and had a vision, and that vision accidentally became the entire Disney afternoon and DuckTales and 30 years of Saturday morning dominance. Bouncing bears, medieval castles, one of the greatest voice casts ever assembled for a cartoon about juice. Adventures of the Gummi Bears. The year is 1984. Michael Eisner is brand new CEO of Walt Disney Company. He is, by all accounts, a man with enormous energy and confidence and willingness to make a decision that will later seem either visionary or completely unhinged, depending on how they turn out. Eisner summons his creative team. Ideas are pitched. Mickey Mouse. Eisner says no, too sacred for Saturday morning. Various other properties. No. And then Eisner, inspired by his kids going absolutely feral for gummy bear candies at summer camp, says, "What about Gummi Bears?" The co-creator of what would become one of the most beloved animated series in Disney history, a man named Jim McGaughan, has since described the team's reaction in an interview. They went to a coffee shop, they sat down, they looked at each other, and, in Megan's words, we said, "He's crazy. I mean, here's your main character and we eat him every week." Megan, unconvinced, went back to his other job producing records. Then the president of the company personally called him on the phone. Hey Jim, it's Michael. Where's my show? And so, faced with the direct personal enthusiasm of the CEO of Disney, Megan said okay and started typing, and his first ideas were, by his own admission, terrible. He had a villain named Licorice Whip. I need you to sit with that. Licorice Whip. The road to DuckTales began with a villain called Licorice Whip. Eventually, the concept evolved into something genuinely incredible.
Dashing and daring, courageous and caring, faithful and friendly, with stories to share. All through the forest they sing out in chorus, marching along as their song fills the air. Gummi bears, bouncing here and there and everywhere. High adventure that's beyond compare. They are the Gummi Bears.
6 anthropomorphic bears who were the last remnants of an ancient, bearish civilization. They live in a secret underground warren called Gummi Glen in a medieval kingdom. They have a great book of gummy containing all the lost knowledge of their ancestors. Their main asset is gummy berry juice, a magical elixir that makes the bears bounce with superhuman ability and makes humans temporarily super strong, which is why literally every villain in the show wants it. And they have to protect all of this from Duke Igthorn, a magnificently ridiculous villain with an army of ogres and an ego roughly the size of the kingdom he's trying to conquer. This is not a show about candy. This show has more lore than some video game franchises. It has ancient civilizations, lost cities that appear for one day every 100 years, barbarian tribes of rogue bears, a whole sailing history of great gummis who left the known world centuries ago. Michael Eisner thought of a candy. His team made Lord of the Rings, efficient use of a mandate. Why this changed everything. The history lesson you didn't know you needed. Here's the thing people forget about Gummi Bears. This show is the reason the Disney afternoon exists. Full stop. Before Gummi Bears, Disney did not do Saturday morning TV. They just didn't. That was Hanna-Barbera's territory, Scooby-Doo's territory, Smurfs' territory. Disney had features and theme parks and was very precious about the brand. Gummi Bears proved that Disney could do serialized animated television with real quality, real writing, real animation, real mythology, and have it work. The show used 20,000 drawings per episode when the standard was 12,000. Every American character and storyboard was designed in California, then shipped to Japanese animators at TMS Entertainment to finish. The show looked gorgeous in a landscape where Saturday morning cartoon basically meant 4 drawings looped over and over while characters' mouths flapped independently of their faces. When Gummi Bears worked, Disney's leadership looked at each other and said, "We can do this at scale." And from that decision came DuckTales. Then Chippendale Rescue Rangers. Then Tailspin. Then Darkwing Duck. Then Gargoyles, which was dark and serialized and took everyone by surprise in the best possible way. The entire golden age of Disney afternoon television is downstream of Michael Eisner watching a child eat a gummy candy. History is occasionally absurd. Oh, and here's a detail I love. The Gummi Bears were secretly loosely modeled on Snow White's 7 dwarfs. 6 bears, each with a distinct personality archetype: the grumpy traditionalist, the wise elder, the tubby lovable one, the vain teenager, the young adventurous cub, the maternal cook. Disney wasn't just building something new. They were quietly drawing on their own mythology from 1937 and translating it for children who were currently wearing parachute pants and didn't know who Snow White was. Respect the continuity. Now, I need to talk about this voice cast, because it is genuinely stacked in a way that should not have been possible for a Saturday morning cartoon in 1985. Tummy Gummy the round, food-obsessed, lovable bear was voiced by Lorenzo Music, who was the voice of Garfield the cat, the real Garfield. Not Bill Murray's version, which is fine, but Lorenzo Music's Garfield was the original, definitive, I would rather be napping Garfield. He was also Carlton the doorman on Rhoda. He was also the voice of Peter Venkman in the animated Ghostbusters cartoon, which means that while Bill Murray was playing a cynical paranormal investigator for adults, Lorenzo Music was playing the same character for children while simultaneously being a lazy cartoon Garfield who loved snacks. He contained multitudes. Zoomy Gummy the forgetful magical elder bear was voiced by Paul Winchell, who was the voice of Disney's Tigger. Bouncy, trouncy, flouncy, pouncy, Tigger that guy. But also Gargamel from the Smurfs. So, Paul Winchell voiced both the beloved magical bouncing character and the villain who hunted small, colorful creatures, and then he went and voiced a character on a show that was also about magical bouncing creatures who were hunted by a villain. He had range. Also, and I cannot stress this enough, Paul Winchell received a patent in 1963 for an early artificial heart prototype. He was a ventriloquist, a voice actor, and a medical device inventor. He just decided to also invent a heart in his spare time. Sure, that's fine. The man who voiced Tigger and Gargamel holds a patent for an artificial heart. If you are not delighted by this fact, I don't know what to do for you. Grammy Gummy the matriarch, the cook, the keeper of the gummy berry juice recipe was voiced by June Foray, who was Rocky the Flying Squirrel from Rocky and Bullwinkle. Who was Natasha Fatale, the villain, on the same show? Who was Cindy Lou Who in the original How the Grinch Stole Christmas? Who had been a working voice actress since the 1940s. She voiced Grammy Gummy for the full run of the show, was still actively working in her 90s, and passed away in 2017 at the age of 99. June Foray was active in animation for 7 decades. 7. She started doing radio voice work before television existed, and she was still at it when the iPhone was 10 years old. That is the most impressive career arc in the history of entertainment, and she did it as a cartoon squirrel. And then Gruffy Gummy, the grumpy traditionalist bear, was originally voiced by Bill Scott, who was Bullwinkle J. Moose. Which means that, in the first season of Adventures of the Gummi Bears, June Foray and Bill Scott, Rocky and Bullwinkle themselves were reunited in the same cast, 2 legendary voice actors who had defined Saturday morning animation for a generation, back together doing a medieval bear show. Bill Scott passed away in November of 1985, just 2 months after the show premiered. But that first season has this hidden magic to it, the moose and the squirrel, one last time, in a cartoon about bouncing and juice. That's a beautiful footnote that almost nobody knows. Now, September 14th, 1985, Gummi Bears launches on NBC. At the exact same time, Disney is also launching a second show on CBS, directly competing with their own first show. The creative strategy of a man who simply does not believe in the word conflict. Let's talk about the Wuzzles. Okay, so real quick, let's appreciate what Disney decided to do on September 14th, 1985. They launched Gummi Bears on NBC, and simultaneously on CBS, they launched the Wuzzles. Different network, same time slot. Disney was quite literally competing against itself for Saturday morning ratings. 2 shows from the same studio broadcasting head-to-head on the same day. Now, why would you do this? Well, the Wuzzles was actually a partnership with Hasbro Toys, who had been developing a toy concept around animal hybrids. Disney independently came up with a similar concept around the same time. Rather than what would normally happen in this situation, which is a lawsuit that lasts 11 years and benefits only, the lawyers, Disney and Hasbro, looked at each other and said, let's do a thing. Hasbro would produce the toys, Disney would produce the show. Clean deal. Except the show had to go to CBS because NBC was already taken by the Bears. So here we are. Disney versus Disney. Capitalism versus capitalism. Same Saturday morning, 2 different channels, 1 company. For the record, NBC won, Gummi Bears crushed it. But that's not the whole story of the Wuzzles. And the whole story is significantly more interesting. The Isle of Woos, where everything is exactly 2 things. The Wuzzles lived on the Isle of Woos, and the governing creative principle of the Isle of Woos was, everything is 2 things. The characters were 2 animals. Bumblelion was a bumblebee and a lion. Butterbear was a butterfly and a bear. Hoppopotamus, which is exactly what it sounds like, was a hippo and a rabbit, and she was the dramatic diva of the group who wanted to be a singer and actress and had an enormous unrequited crush on Bumblelion, who had his heart set on the gentler Butterbear. We love a slow burn love triangle in 1985 children's animation. It has everything. Rhino Key was a rhino and a monkey whose entire personality was Chaos Agent with no off switch. Ellaroo was an elephant and a kangaroo and had a literal pouch, which the writers used whenever the plot required someone to carry something. And Moosel, a moose and a seal, was the youngest, the most accident-prone, the most imaginative, and the one who saw monsters everywhere. Moosel was essentially the Shaggy from Scooby-Doo of the group, except smaller and also vaguely aquatic. And it wasn't just the characters. The food was hybrid, The architecture was hybrid. They lived in castle scrapers, castles crossed with skyscrapers. Their phone was a telephonograph. They ate appleberries. The writers sat down at day one and said, commit to the bit. Every single prop in this show is two things. Every background element, all of it. Two things. Forever. They committed so hard to this concept that it became genuinely charming. The Isle of Woos was its own fully realized world, and it had been built with a consistency and a silliness that is in retrospect kind of admirable. Bill Scott, Bullwinkle, and the ending nobody chose. Moosel, the tiny moose seal, was voiced by Bill Scott, the same Bill Scott who, as we just discussed, was voicing Gruffy Gummi over on NBC at the same time. The man was doing two Disney shows simultaneously. He was in fact also voicing the villain Brat the Boar Dragon sidekick, who communicated primarily through grunts, sputters, and tantrums, also on the Wuzzles. Bill Scott was playing three separate characters across two separate shows on two separate networks on the same Saturday morning. On November 29, 1985, Bill Scott died of a heart attack. He was 65 years old. He was Bullwinkle. He was Rocky's best friend. He was a veteran of the J. Ward Animation Empire, the studio that gave us some of the smartest, sharpest, most satirical cartoons ever made. He wrote, he produced, he directed. He was one of the most important figures in the history of American animation, and he died the same year that his two biggest late career shows were on the air. Production on the Wuzzles stopped. Plans for a second season were abandoned. In the final recorded episode, Moosel doesn't appear. Nobody recast him. Nobody tried to write around it with a throwaway line. He's just absent. The last episode of the Wuzzles has a quiet gap where Moosel used to be. The show ended not with a bang, not even with a proper goodbye, just with a presence that was no longer there. On Gummi Bears, Bill Scott's role as Gruffy was recast with voice actor Corey Burton, who did an outstanding job. The show ran 5 more seasons. But the Wuzzles didn't get that. CBS canceled it. ABC aired reruns. And that was that. Except, and here's where the story gets genuinely funny again, because the Wuzzles apparently cannot leave this earth without a punchline. The Wuzzles were more popular in the UK than they were in America. In Britain, the Wuzzles and Gummi Bears aired on the same channel at different times, so they weren't competing. Both were hits. The Wuzzles pilot was shown in British cinemas as a theatrical featurette alongside a re-release of Disney's Bambi.
We made it, Mother! Mother!
Meaning British children got Bambi's mom dying, followed immediately by a bumblebee lion hybrid committing slapstick in a castle scraper. Saturday afternoon in the UK was emotionally complicated. The undying immortal Wuzzle costumes, a ghost story. And now we need to talk about the ghost story. Because the Wuzzles were done, and Disney moved on, and the show entered that limbo of syndication reruns and was largely forgotten. But the mascot costumes, the big foam walk-around characters that Disney used for theme parks and parades, those costumes were at some point accidentally sold off. Nobody knows exactly how. Nobody knows exactly when. Disney apparently just lost track of them. And ever since, they have been turning up in the wild, out in the world, unanchored from any IP context. The Moosel costume appeared in a Dixie Chicks music video. Ellaroo the Elephant Kangaroo showed up in Old School, the Will Ferrell comedy. Wuzzle costumes have been spotted as background extras in Malcolm in the Middle, Grounded for Life, and Sunny with a Chance. They keep appearing silently in the background of unrelated scenes, like extremely colorful ghosts, like the Disney characters that capitalism forgot, floating through American pop culture in a state of permanent, unsupervised freedom. If you are watching any movie or TV show from the late 80s through the 2010s, and you see something that looks like a round, colorful, vaguely animal-shaped creature in the background that nobody is acknowledging that might be a Wuzzle, they're out there. They're living their best lives. They answer to no one. And honestly, good for them. Okay, I've made a lot of jokes today. The tree deaths, the artificial heart, the lost Wuzzles costume currently haunting Will Ferrell's movies, and those jokes are real. But here's the part I actually mean. These 3 shows, a Spanish gnome cartoon based on a Dutch nature book, a medieval bear epic born from candy, and a 13-episode hybrid animal tragedy that was quietly beloved in England. These shows were doing something the 80s didn't really get credit for. They were treating children like they were worth talking to seriously. David the Gnome didn't sanitize death. Gummi Bears built an entire civilization with its own mythology and history and moral complexity. The Wuzzles, in 13 episodes, had a love triangle, a villain, and a genuine menace, and enough world building to support a show that deserved way more time than it got. We grew up with this stuff, and we carry it. Not because we were kids and we'd watch anything. We watched plenty of garbage too, let's be honest. The 80s had real garbage. And because these particular shows had something real in them, something made by people who cared. David the Gnome became trees. The Gummi Bears bounced. The Wuzzles lived with a split personality, and we watched it all on Saturday mornings in our footy pajamas with Cocoa Puffs, completely unaware that what we were being given was something we'd still think about 35 years later. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. So listen, now I want to hear from you. What kid shows were special to you growing up? Tell me in the comments. Even if you don't know the name but just have some faint memory of it, I'll hunt it down for you faster than the hunter who shot Bambi's mom. What? Too soon?